she thought she was safe. Just another quiet afternoon in the neighborhood she called home. But safety is fragile when skin color becomes a target. What began as a simple walk to her front door turned into a nightmare that no family should ever face. Strangers, fueled by authority they didn't deserve, confronted her with words sharp as blades. And when words failed, violence followed. This wasn't a crime of chance. It was a deliberate act of power, the kind that hides in plain sight, wearing badges of neighborhood protection, but leaving behind scars far deeper than bruises. She wasn't just assaulted, she was humiliated, treated as if her very existence didn't belong there. What the enforcers didn't know, couldn't know, was who she was connected to. Behind her stood a husband who had lived his life defending freedom, a man who had faced enemies overseas but never imagined the harshest battle would come to his own doorstep. This story isn't about one incident. It's about the chilling truth that, even in places meant to be safe, racism waits for its chance to strike. And when it does, it leaves behind more than broken trust. It leaves a question we can't afford to ignore. How far will people go when prejudice is given power? It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon. Monica had just come back from the grocery store, juggling her bags, humming softly to herself as she walked toward the front porch of the home she and her husband had worked years to build. To anyone passing by, she looked like any other neighbor, just a woman returning home, ready to settle into the quiet comfort of her day. But behind the painted fences and manicured lawns, the neighborhood wasn't as welcoming as it seemed. Monica and her husband David had noticed the stares, the whispers, and the way silence followed them when they walked past certain houses. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, an unspoken reminder that to some people they didn't belong. David, a retired Navy SEAL, had seen conflict in some of the world's most dangerous places. But for Monica, home was supposed to be different. Safe. She believed that here, in this quiet community, they could finally enjoy peace. That belief was about to be shattered. The day started like any other. Sunlight poured across the driveways, children's laughter echoed faintly in the distance, and Monica carried her bags toward the door. What she didn't see, however, were the HOA enforcers circling the block. Clipboard in hand, authority in their step. They weren't looking for rules to enforce. They were looking for someone to confront. And on that day, Monica would become their target. Monica bent down to set her bags on the porch, the weight finally pulling at her arms. She was just about to pull out her keys when she heard it, the sharp crunch of shoes on gravel. At first, she thought it was just a neighbor passing by. But then came the voices. Low at first, then louder, sharper, carrying that tone she had come to know too well. "Ma'am, you can't just do whatever you want around here." She turned, startled, to see two men in matching polo shirts, clipboards in hand, their eyes narrowed. They weren't smiling. These were the HOA enforcers, the self-proclaimed guardians of order in the neighborhood. She'd seen them before, knocking on doors, pointing at lawns, scribbling on their forms like they were writing police reports. But she had never expected them to turn their attention on her. Monica forced a polite smile, though her chest tightened. "I live here," she said calmly. One of them smirked, tilting his head. "Funny, that's not what we've heard. Are you sure you're in the right place?" The words cut deeper than they should have. She had the deed, the mortgage payments, and the years of hard work that had earned her and David this house. But none of that mattered in their tone. What mattered was the quiet accusation. "You don't belong here." She reached for her keys again, hoping to brush it off, but the men stepped closer, blocking her path. Their presence wasn't just inconvenient. It was threatening. She felt the bag slip from her hands, apples rolling across the porch as her heart pounded in her chest. "Why don't you show us some proof?" the taller one demanded. His voice wasn't asking, it was cornering. Monica froze. Proof? In her own yard, at her own front door? The absurdity almost made her laugh, but the weight of their stares erased any trace of humor. She tried to steady her voice, but it shook anyway. "My husband and I live here, please. Move aside." They didn't. Instead, the shorter man leaned in closer, his face just inches from hers. "Lady, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Her pulse raced. She could feel the tension vibrating in her chest, each second dragging heavier than the last. She had been warned about this kind of thing. Her grandmother's stories, her mother's lessons, and the countless headlines she had tried to ignore. She thought those things belonged to another time. But now, standing on her own porch, she realized history had a way of repeating itself. And then, without warning, it escalated. One of the men grabbed the grocery bag still dangling from her wrist and yanked it away, sending oranges tumbling down the steps. Monica gasped, stumbling back, her shoulder hitting the doorframe. It wasn't just about groceries, it was about power. A silent message delivered through force. "We control this space. Not you." She wanted to scream, to shout for help, but the street was eerily quiet. No neighbors rushing in, no cameras raised, no witnesses willing to step forward. The world outside her yard might as well have vanished, leaving her alone with two men who saw her not as a neighbor, not as a woman, but as a problem to eliminate. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the door, desperate to get inside, but they crowded closer. "Don't walk away from us," one barked, his voice booming. Tears pricked her eyes, but she swallowed them down. Crying would only feed their cruelty. She stood frozen in place, every instinct screaming at her to do something, but what? Any wrong move could push them further. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, the taller one reached out. His hand shoved against her shoulder, pressing her back into the wall. For a split second, time stood still. The warmth of the sun disappeared, and the sound of children playing down the street vanished. All that remained was the cold pressure of his hand, the humiliation of being pinned on her own doorstep, and the terrifying realization that she was no longer safe. She closed her eyes, her heart slamming against her ribs, whispering a silent prayer that David would come home soon. But she didn't know. He was already on his way. And when he arrived, nothing about this neighborhood, or those men, would ever be the same again. David pulled into the driveway just as the bags of groceries tumbled across the lawn. At first, he thought it was an accident. Maybe Monica had dropped them. But then he saw her, pressed against the wall, her face pale, her body rigid with fear. And standing over her, two men. For a split second, the world blurred. The driveway, the front yard, the quiet street, all of it dissolved into a tunnel of rage. David had faced combat zones. He had stood against enemies armed and merciless, but nothing compared to the sight of his wife being cornered in their own home. He flung open the car door, his boots striking the pavement like thunder. "Get your hands off her!" The force of his voice made the men glance up, startled. But instead of stepping back, they squared themselves, puffing up with the false authority of men who thought they were untouchable. "She doesn't belong here," one sneered. "We're just doing our job." David's fists clenched so tight his knuckles burnt white. He had trained for years to control his temper, to act with discipline even in chaos. But this was different. The military had prepared him for war, but not for watching his wife humiliated by cowards wielding clipboards and prejudice. Monica's eyes met his, wide and pleading. That look ignited something in him, a storm he couldn't hold back. He stepped forward, towering over them, his voice low and sharp like a blade. "You're trespassing on my property. Touch her again, and you'll regret it." The taller man smirked, trying to mask the flicker of fear in his eyes. "Big talk. What are you going to do about it?" That was the moment the last thread snapped. David closed the distance in 2 strides, his body a wall of fury and control. He didn't strike, not yet. But the sheer force of his presence sent the shorter man stumbling back. These were not seasoned enforcers. They were bullies, and for the first time they realized they'd chosen the wrong target. Still, the taller one refused to back down. He shoved David's chest, testing him, daring him. But he underestimated the man standing before him. In an instant, David's training kicked in. His hand shot up, grabbing the man's wrist, twisting it with precise, practiced strength. A clipboard clattered to the ground. The man's bravado shattered into a cry of pain. Monica gasped, her body shaking as the second enforcer lunged forward. David pivoted, pushing Monica safely behind him, his voice booming like a command on the battlefield. "Stay back!" For the neighbors peering from their windows, it looked like chaos. For David, it was controlled fury. Every move was measured, every motion restrained just enough to avoid crossing the line from defense into destruction. He wasn't here to win a fight. He was here to protect his wife, to reclaim the dignity those men had tried to strip away. The shorter enforcer froze, his bravado draining under the weight of David's glare. He backed away, muttering something under his breath, but his partner wasn't as quick to retreat. Caught in David's grip, he struggled, spitting words of hatred that only fueled the tension burning in the air. And then, sirens. Faint at first, then louder, approaching fast. Someone had called the police. David's heart pounded, but not from fear of the men he held. He knew what could happen next. He had seen too many headlines. Too many lives ended in the space between misunderstanding and judgment. A black man, a confrontation, police sirens, he didn't need to imagine the danger. He was standing in it. He released the man with a shove, his chest heaving. The enforcer stumbled back, clutching his wrist, his pride shattered. Both men retreated down the steps, spitting insults as they fled, but David barely heard them. His focus was on the flashing lights approaching in the distance. Monica clung to his arm, her voice trembling. "David, what if they don't believe us?" He didn't answer. His jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the sirens cutting through the neighborhood calm. He knew this wasn't the end. If anything, it was only the beginning, because the next battle wouldn't be fought with fists, it would be fought with truth. The sirens cut through the air, their glow painting the street in flashes of red and blue. Neighbors who had watched in silence moments earlier now stepped out of their homes drawn by the drama, their phones raised to record, but not to help. Monica clung to David's arm, trembling as the patrol car pulled up to the curb. Two officers stepped out, hands instinctively drifting toward their belts. Their eyes flicked from the shaken woman to the towering figure of David to the two HOA enforcers holding their wounds and shouting over each other. The air was thick with accusation before a single question was asked. David knew the danger. He raised his hand slowly, not in surrender, but in a silent plea. "See me as a man, not a threat." Monica's voice broke the tension, trembling but steady. "They attacked me. They assaulted me on my own porch." The words hung heavy in the night. For once, the truth wasn't drowned out. The officers listened. They separated the men, took statements, and noted the groceries scattered across the steps and the bruises already forming on Monica's arm. The enforcers' protests, that they were just doing their job, that people like her didn't belong, betrayed them more than they realized. Eventually, the sirens faded. Reports were filed. The men were escorted away. But peace did not return. Because peace isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of justice. And justice, in that moment, still felt far away. For Monica, the scars weren't just physical. Every glance at the front porch reminded her of the fear she felt, of being cornered in broad daylight with no one rushing to help. For David, the memory was heavier still. He had defended freedom on foreign soil, only to find that his greatest battle awaited him at home, in a neighborhood that treated his family like intruders. The incident didn't just wound them, it changed them. Every trip to the grocery store carried new weight. Every walk through the neighborhood felt watched, judged, and measured against standards that others didn't have to face. The illusion of safety in their home was shattered. But here's the truth. This story isn't unique. Monica's fear, David's rage, the silence of the neighbors, all of it echoes across communities, repeating like a broken record. From gated suburbs to city sidewalks, from quiet cul-de-sacs to crowded streets, racism finds its way into the spaces people are told should be safe. And every time it happens, another piece of trust is stolen. This isn't just about Monica or David. It's about what happens when authority, no matter how small, is poisoned by prejudice. When rules meant to protect are weaponized against the very people they're supposed to serve. When a clipboard becomes as dangerous as a gun, not because of the object itself, but because of the hate that wields it. The impact lingers. Not only for those directly involved, but for every person watching, every child growing up in these neighborhoods, learning, whether spoken or unspoken, what their skin color means in the eyes of others. And so, we're left with questions we can't ignore. How many more families will have their peace ripped away before things change? How many more people will be told, in words or in silence, that they don't belong in the very places they've built with their own hands? David and Monica's story is one of survival, but survival shouldn't be the standard. Dignity, safety, belonging, these are not privileges to be earned, but rights that every human being deserves. So as you sit with this story, ask yourself, what would you have done if you were watching from across the street? Would you have stayed silent or spoken up? Would you have turned away or stepped in? Because silence is not neutral. Silence takes sides. And every time we choose it, injustice wins. This isn't just their story. It's our story. A story that continues until enough of us decide it must end. The question is, will you be part of the silence or part of the change?